I will never forget the way my grandfather's voice sliced through the warmth of that Christmas dinner. One moment, the chandelier glowed soft gold over the table. My parents were laughing too loudly, pretending everything in our family was perfect. And then he set his fork down, looked straight at me, and asked, "Emily, are you still living in the house I bought you?" The room froze. My breath caught halfway in my throat. I wasn't supposed to hear that question. I wasn't supposed to have a house. Slowly, with every pair of eyes drilling into me, I whispered, "Grandpa, I don't live in any house. I've never had one." My mother's wineglass slipped. My father's smile snapped like cheap plastic. And my grandfather, Walter Carter, a man who'd been gone for 10 years and suddenly returned like a winter storm, turned toward them with a stare that felt like judgment itself. In that moment, I knew something in our family had just cracked open. I hadn't wanted to come home that night. Christmas at the Carter house was never really about love or family. It was about performance, about my mother's perfectly curled hair, my father's booming laugh, the towering tree decorated like a department store window, and the illusion that the Carters were a flawless, enviable family. I parked 2 houses down, partly because I didn't want my dented 2008 hatchback ruining their aesthetic, mostly because I didn't want to walk through that front door feeling small again. Inside, everything sparkled. Crystal ornaments refracted the light. A string quartet version of Silent Night floated through the living room. Guests murmured compliments. My parents basked in every one. My mother spotted me first. "Emily," she said with that thin, polite smile, "you could have worn something more festive." I swallowed. Same script, every year. My father clapped my back too hard. "There she is, my hardworking girl." I hated how he said it, as if my long hours at my underpaying design firm were a failure to be teased, not a life I was desperately trying to build for myself. Then the doorbell rang. Everything stopped. My mother's face drained of color. My father's smile twitched. They exchanged a glance, fearful, startled, before my dad hurried to answer it. And when the door swung open, the entire room gasped. Because standing there, wearing a charcoal coat dusted with snow, leaning slightly on an ebony cane, all was my grandfather, Walter Carter, the man my parents swore hated family gatherings, the man they said didn't want to see us anymore, the billionaire everyone thought had cut ties and vanished. Yet he stepped inside as if he'd never left, and the first person his eyes found was me. "Emily," he whispered, voice trembling with something too soft to be anger. "My girl, look at you." And he pulled me into a hug so full, so genuine, so aching with affection, that for the first time in years, my parents looked genuinely terrified. Dinner should have been beautiful. The table was set with gold-rimmed china and red velvet napkins, candles flickering between crystal flutes. My parents kept smiling too wide, too forced, while sneaking glances at my grandfather as if he were a live grenade they were praying wouldn't roll in their direction. Grandpa Walter sat beside me, refusing the seat of honor at the head of the table and choosing mine instead. "It's been too long," he told me quietly as I poured him water. "I've missed every year I wasn't here." I didn't know what to say. For a man who vanished a decade ago, he sounded heartbreakingly sincere. Halfway through the meal, my mother lifted her wine and chirped, "So, Dad, how long are you in town? We would have cleaned up more if we knew you were visiting." He cut her off without even looking her way. His eyes were on me. "Emily," he said, voice gentle but carrying across the table, "are you still living in the house I bought you?" The moment the words left his mouth, the atmosphere snapped. Forks paused midair. The candles hissed. My heartbeat crashed into my ears. I blinked at him. "Grandpa, what house?" Dead silence. My mother's hand jerked, her wine sloshing over the rim. My father coughed, as if choking on something sharp. Grandpa leaned closer, brows furrowing. "The house I paid for 3 years ago. The one Richard and Elaine promised they purchased for you. The one they told me you loved." I laughed, but it wasn't a laugh. More like a sound ripped from shock. "Grandpa," I whispered, "I live in a 1-bedroom apartment with a leaking ceiling. I've never owned a house." He froze. Then he turned slowly, painfully toward my parents. My mother whispered, barely audible, "Dad, this isn't the right time." And then Grandpa Walter spoke, each word dropping like a stone. "Richard, Elaine, where is the money I sent for my granddaughter's home?" My father's smile collapsed. My mother went white, and I sat there, trembling, realizing this was the moment my entire life, everything I thought I knew, was about to be rewritten. My grandfather's voice echoed through the dining room, heavy enough to crush the air out of all of us. No one moved, no one breathed. Then he stood. At 78, his posture wasn't perfect anymore. But in that moment, he looked 10 feet tall. A man used to commanding boardrooms, fleets, empires. A man who built a billion-dollar logistics corporation from nothing and didn't tolerate liars. "Everyone, living room," he ordered. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. My parents rose shakily. My mother's hands quivered so hard she nearly dropped her napkin. Guests exchanged looks, unsure whether to leave or pretend nothing was happening. But Grandpa walked straight past them, relying lightly on his cane, and settled on the leather sofa beneath the massive Christmas wreath. The fireplace crackled behind him, casting him in an almost judicial glow. I sat on the armchair closest to him. My parents sat opposite us, the guilty side of the room. Grandpa folded his hands. "Emily," he said softly, "tell me exactly where you live." I swallowed, glancing at my parents before speaking. "A studio apartment on 9th Street, the cheap one behind the laundromat. My ceiling leaks when it rains and the heat breaks every other week." My mother flinched as if I'd slapped her. He continued, voice steady. "And your job?" "I'm a junior designer at Lumen Interiors. Entry level. I'm barely covering groceries." My father muttered. "She's exaggerating." Silence. I missed a disdain. Grandpa's tone sliced the room clean open. Dad shrank back. Grandpa turned to me again. "Have your parents ever mentioned anything about a house? A gift? Anything?" I shook my head. "Never." A tremor passed through his jaw, a storm building behind his eyes. Then he turned, slowly, toward my parents. "3 years ago," he began, "I wired you $400,000, earmarked specifically, explicitly for a modest starter home for Emily." My mother's lips parted. My father stared at the carpet. Grandpa continued, pulling his phone from his coat pocket. "I still have the messages you sent me." He tapped the screen, then read aloud, voice icy. "Thank you, Dad. Emily is settling into the new place and absolutely loves it. We'll send photos soon." My breath caught. Photos? New place? My parents had told him that? My father finally spoke, his voice strained, desperate. "Dad, we were going to buy it. But we needed time. Things got complicated." "Complicated?" Grandpa snapped. "You told me she'd moved in. You lied." Elaine's tears spilled. We didn't want her to waste it. Emily doesn't know how to manage property." "Enough." Grandpa rose from the sofa with a sharp crack of his cane hitting the floor. "Emily has been living in poverty while you, my own son and daughter-in-law, spent the money meant for her future." My mother sobbed. My father clenched his jaw, a silent, useless anger boiling there. And then Grandpa looked at me. His eyes softened. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I trusted them. I thought I was giving you a home." Something in my chest broke, something old and raw that I didn't even know was still there. Before I could speak, he turned back to my parents, voice like thunder contained. "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. We will settle this. You will bring every document, every receipt, every account statement, and you will explain every dollar." He leaned forward on his cane, staring them down. "And if you don't," his voice lowered to a quiet, devastating promise, "I will handle this my way." My father's face collapsed. My mother burst into full, shaking sobs. And I sat there, caught between shock and heartbreak, realizing that the life I'd struggled through wasn't an accident. It was engineered. The guests quietly slipped out after that. No one dared linger in a house where the temperature had just dropped below freezing. Even the Christmas lights outside seemed dimmer, as if the entire neighborhood sensed the implosion happening inside the Carter home. My parents followed Grandpa into his study like two criminals being escorted into an interrogation room. The heavy mahogany door shut behind them with a thud that rippled down my spine. I lingered outside, heart pounding. Their muffled voices escalated almost instantly. My father, "Dad, you don't understand the pressure we've been under." My grandfather, "I understand theft, Richard. I understand lies." My mother, "We only borrowed it. We plan to..." Grandpa's voice cut like a blade. "Borrowed? You bought yourself a lake house." I slapped a hand over my mouth. "A lake house?" My parents always claimed it was an investment property they'd saved for years to acquire. Now I knew the truth. It was bought with the money meant for me. The door swung open suddenly, and my father stormed out, red-faced, breathing hard like he'd run a marathon. "Emily," he snapped, "don't you dare look at me like that. I'm not—" "Don't play innocent," he hissed. "You think you're some victim? Your grandfather spoils you for one night and suddenly—" "Richard." Grandpa's voice loomed behind him. My father froze. Grandpa stepped out of the study, placing a steadying hand on my shoulder. His expression softened only for me. "We're done for tonight, sweetheart. Go home and rest. I'll come see where you live." My mother gasped. "No, Dad, please, her apartment isn't—" He turned on her. "What? Isn't good enough for my granddaughter? Because you two made sure of that?" Mom covered her face with both hands, shoulders shaking. Dad pulled her into his chest, but even from where I stood, I could see it wasn't affection, it was fear. Grandpa looked back at them with eyes filled, not with anger, but with betrayal so deep it seemed to age him. "We meet tomorrow at Jonathan Hale's office," he declared. 9 sharp. And don't insult me by being late." I walked him to the front door, unsure if I should hug him again or apologize or collapse into tears. But he squeezed my hand and said softly, "I trusted the wrong people. Let me fix what I broke." My parents watched from the hallway, silent like two ghosts fading at the edges. When Grandpa stepped out into the cold night, his breath forming icy clouds, he paused and looked back at me. "Don't let their shame become yours, Emily." The door closed behind him, and for the first time in my life I saw the truth in my parents' eyes. They weren't devastated that they had hurt me. They were terrified that they had been caught. I barely slept. All night I replayed Grandpa's words, his shock, his disappointment, the way his voice cracked when he realized I'd been struggling alone. I kept expecting to wake up and find the entire evening had been a nightmare stitched together by exhaustion. But morning came, and the nightmare was still very, very real. At exactly 8:10 a.m., my phone buzzed. "Grandpa, Walter. Outside. Let me in." My chest tightened. I rushed down the rusted stairwell, my boots echoing against the peeling paint. When I pushed open the building's front door, I found Grandpa standing there in a charcoal coat, snowflakes settling into his silver hair. His eyes scanned the building slowly, taking in the cracked bricks, the flickering 3-apartment sign, the overflowing dumpster too close to the entrance. He whispered, barely audible, "They let you live here?" I swallowed. It's not that bad. But it was. And we both knew it. I led him up the stairs, avoiding the spot on the railing that broke off last week. When we reached my door, I hesitated. I had never felt so exposed. But Grandpa nodded gently. "Show me, Emily. I need to see." So I pushed the door open. The apartment looked exactly as it always did, small, suffocating, exhausted. But in front of my grandfather, it suddenly looked humiliating. A single pull-out bed that doubled as a sofa, a kitchenette with one burner broken, a patch of mold near the bathroom tile I'd tried scrubbing for months, the plastic Christmas tree from Dollar Mart, the bucket under the leak near the window. Grandpa stepped inside slowly, like he had walked into a crime scene. He touched the wall, ran his fingers over the peeling paint, then looked at my drafting table covered in sketches, textbooks, and instant noodle cups. "Emily?" His voice cracked. "You've been living like this?" I forced a smile. "It's temporary. Rent is cheap and I'm saving up." "Saving up?" His tone sharpened. "For what? Survival?" I didn't answer. Grandpa walked toward the window, staring at the duct-taped frame and the street below. His hands trembled on his cane out of anger, not age. Then he looked at me with eyes filled with a mixture of love and devastation. "I gave them money," he whispered. "Enough for a safe home, a decent life, a beginning." His voice rose. "And instead of giving that to you, they used it for themselves." My throat tightened. They thought I wasn't ready. He turned sharply. "Ready? Emily, you've been ready for everything life threw at you and you faced it alone." His voice broke. "Because they left you with nothing. That did it. The dam burst. Years of silence, shame, and pretending I was fine, I finally let it spill. I worked 2 jobs. I skipped meals. I patched the ceiling myself because the landlord didn't care. I paid my own tuition. They said I should learn responsibility, Grandpa." My voice cracked. I thought I deserved this. Grandpa's expression shattered. He stepped forward slowly, painfully, and pulled me into his arms. His coat smelled faintly of cedar and winter air. "Emily," he whispered into my hair, "you deserved love, not punishment." I clung to him, sobbing in a way I hadn't allowed myself to sob in years. When I finally stepped back, he wiped my tears with gentle thumbs. "Get your things," he said. "You're not spending another night in this place." I stared. "Where are we going?" He smiled, sad but determined. "To the truth," he said. "And after that, to justice." He placed a warm hand on my shoulder. "Today, we let your parents explain themselves to someone who won't let them lie." I blinked. "The lawyer?" He nodded once. "Jonathan Hale is waiting. And trust me, Emily." His eyes hardened. "Your parents won't walk out of his office the same people they walked in as." A cold shiver ran down my spine. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to face my parents. Because this time, I wouldn't be facing them alone. Jonathan Hale's office didn't look like a place where lives were destroyed. It was too bright, too modern. All glass walls, chrome finishes, and sharp white lighting that made everything feel sterilized like a surgical room for secrets. Grandpa and I arrived at 8:55 a.m. My parents arrived at 9:12. Of course they were late. They walked in fast, my mother trembling, my father stiff, jaw tight like he was marching into battle. Dad barely spared me a glance. Mom tried to give me a weak smile, but it collapsed when she saw Grandpa's expression. Jonathan Hale, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, impeccably pressed suit rose from behind his desk. "Mr. Carter, Emily." He shook our hands, then turned to my parents. "Richard, Elaine, please sit." No warmth, no politeness, just business. We all took our seats around a long conference table. My parents sat across from me and Grandpa, like an invisible line had been drawn down the room. Jonathan opened a thick navy folder. "Let's begin." My father cleared his throat. "Jonathan, this is a misunderstanding. We just need more time. And I need honesty," Grandpa cut in. Jonathan didn't even glance at Dad. He simply pulled out a packet, a printed bank statement, and slid it across the table. "This is the transfer Mr. Carter made to you 3 years ago. $400,000. Marked for the purchase of a home for Emily." My mother stared at the paper as if it might burn her. Jonathan continued, pulling out another document. "This," he slid the next page forward, "is the record of where that money went." My stomach twisted. I didn't want to look, but I did. $40,000. Custom renovations for a lake property. $12,800. European vacation package. $9,200. Jewelry purchase. $2,750. Luxury spa retreat. $189,500. Down payment on a lakeside house in Clearwater Bend. My parents' house. Not mine. My father leaned forward, voice rising. "You don't understand. We intended to put the house in her name later." "Later?" Grandpa cut in. "When? After you finished enjoying it yourselves?" "It was an investment," Dad snapped. "We worked harder than she ever did. She hasn't earned." Jonathan slammed his hand onto the table. The sound cracked through the room. "Mr. Carter," he said coldly, "your father didn't ask whether you earned it. He instructed you to purchase a home for Emily. You lied, and you misappropriated funds that were not yours." My mother broke into sobs again. We didn't want her to ruin the opportunity. She's irresponsible. I felt something inside me snap. "Irresponsible?" I leaned forward, voice shaking. "I worked 2 jobs. I paid my own tuition. I lived in a place you wouldn't let a dog sleep in. And you call me irresponsible?" My mother couldn't meet my eyes. My father glared like I'd betrayed him. Grandpa reached over and took my hand gently, grounding me. Jonathan turned to Walter. "Mr. Carter, shall we proceed with the next matter?" My parents stiffened. "What matter?" Dad demanded. Walter exhaled deeply, looking suddenly older but more resolute than ever. "The matter," he said, "of my estate." The air went dead. Jonathan pulled out a sealed envelope with a crimson wax crest, Walter's personal seal. He opened it and began reading. 2 months ago, Walter Carter amended his will. As of this amendment, his primary beneficiaries are Emily Carter and Melissa Carter. My aunt. Not my parents. Dad surged to his feet, knocking his chair backward. "This is insane. Dad, you cannot be serious. After everything, sit." Grandpa's voice rumbled like distant thunder. Dad didn't sit. He slammed his palm on the table. "You can't cut us out, I'm your son." Jonathan lifted another document. A thick one, bound. "And this," he announced, is the valuation of Mr. Carter's assets. He placed it on the table with a thud. Dad froze. Mom's tears stopped midstream. My heart hammered. Jonathan opened it. Walter Carter's net worth is currently estimated at $922 million. Silence. Pure, suffocating silence. My parents looked like statues, pale, carved, horrified. Grandpa's voice cut through the stillness. I built an empire, and I will not leave it to people who lie, cheat, and abandon their own daughter. My father's voice rose into a strangled shout. You're giving it to her? She didn't build anything. She didn't suffer like we didn't suffer, I whispered. He looked at me and something ugly flickered across his face, something I'd spent years pretending I didn't see. Grandpa leaned forward. Emily will inherit everything, he said calmly. Because she has character. Something money can't buy. Something you... He looked straight at Dad. Lost long ago. My father's rage burst. No, I refuse this manipulation, he roared. You're letting that girl poison your mind. That girl, Grandpa said, voice low and dangerous, is the only one in this room who hasn't lied to me. Jonathan closed the file. This concludes the estate meeting. Unless, he added, eyes like steel, someone would like to contest the will legally? The question hung like a blade. Dad swallowed. Mom trembled. Neither spoke. They knew they had no ground. No evidence. No moral high ground. No claim, because everything had just collapsed at their feet. And all they could do was watch the empire they thought was theirs shift into my hands. If the room had felt tense before, now it felt radioactive. My parents sat stiffly, like their spines had turned to stone. My mother clutched the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles bleached white. My father stared at the floor, jaw clenched, temples pulsing as if the truth might magically disappear if he refused to meet our eyes. But Jonathan wasn't finished. He pulled out one more folder, a thicker one, bound in deep burgundy, sealed with a gold clip. Mr. Carter, he said, turning to my grandfather, with your permission, we should proceed to the documented evidence. My father's head snapped up. What evidence? Grandpa's gaze sharpened. The evidence I told Jonathan to gather, after you lied to me the first time. Dad stood so abruptly, his chair screeched. You investigated us? Grandpa didn't blink. You lied about your daughter's home. You lied to my face. I needed to know if it was a one-time sin or a pattern. Jonathan slid the burgundy folder into the center of the table. Let's review, the lawyer said, voice crisp as glass breaking. Starting with the misuse of Emily's home funds, he opened the folder. Page 1. Down payment, Clearwater Bend Lake House, $189,500. Signed by Richard Carter. Dad swallowed hard. That wasn't misuse, you don't understand how. Jonathan lifted a hand. Next. Page 2. Invoice. Diamond Crescent Jewelers, $9,214. Recipient. Elaine Carter. Mom's face flushed scarlet. I was going to pay it back, I just... Next, Jonathan repeated. Page 3. Flight tickets. Rome, Paris, Barcelona, $12,800. 2 passengers. Richard and Elaine Carter. My stomach lurched. Dad slammed both palms on the table. That was our anniversary trip. It had nothing to do with, but it was paid with Emily's house funds, Jonathan said coldly. Funds Walter entrusted to you. Funds you repeatedly claimed were already used to purchase a home for her. My mother stared into her lap, shaking. Jonathan flipped again. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. Luxury purchases. Spa retreats. Designer handbags. Renovations on the lake house. All tied to the same account. All paid for with my grandfather's money. Money meant for my future. Dad's voice cracked. Stop this. Stop, Jonathan. We can settle this privately. This is private, Jonathan replied. I could have summoned law enforcement instead. Mom whimpered. Grandpa leaned back, his cane resting across his knees, his voice low and full of steel. You both lived a life of comfort funded by money that belonged to my granddaughter. Emily patched leaks in her apartment ceiling while you stood on the deck of a lake house bought with her home. My mother broke, sobbing into her hands. Dad, please, we made mistakes, but we're still your family. Grandpa's lips pressed into a thin, trembling line. Family, he repeated softly, is not a shield you can hide behind when you've done wrong. Dad's fists balled. So that's it? He snarled. You're going to destroy your own son? Throw your entire legacy to someone who didn't earn it? Emily doesn't know how to handle money. She'll waste it. I stood. No trembling. No shrinking. Just clarity. Cold and sharp. Enough. Dad blinked. I stepped closer to him, close enough to smell his aftershave. The same one he wore when he took Mom to their fancy parties while I stayed home alone as a kid. You think I didn't earn anything? I asked quietly. You think I'm some naive little girl who doesn't understand responsibility? I pointed at the documents spread across the table. You misused $400,000 and lied for years. I worked 2 jobs to pay for things you could have helped with but didn't. I lived in a moldy, freezing apartment while you looked me in the eyes every holiday and pretended everything was normal. Dad's face twisted in rage. You don't talk to me like that. Yes, I said, louder. I do. The room went silent. I stared into the eyes of the man I once wished would just love me. Because you didn't just lie to Grandpa, I said. You lied to me. You abandoned me while I was still living under your roof. Dad's breath shook. Mom whispered through tears. Emily, honey. I turned to her, not cruel but firm. You let it happen. She shattered. Grandpa's voice entered the silence, low but devastating. You betrayed your daughter, and you betrayed me. Dad opened his mouth, but Grandpa raised a hand. No more excuses. No more lies. Jonathan slid a final document across the table, a legal notice. Dad picked it up with trembling fingers. His face drained of color as he read. What is this? Jonathan answered calmly. Full transfer of the Clearwater Bend property to Emily Carter within 7 days. Failure to comply will result in formal charges: fraud, misappropriation, and breach of financial trust. Mom's jaw dropped. Charges? Dad, you wouldn't. I would, Grandpa said. He looked at them with eyes full of hurt, not hatred. The kind of pain that comes from loving someone who chose to be cruel. Dad staggered backward into his chair. Mom sobbed uncontrollably. Jonathan closed his folder. This meeting is concluded. Grandpa rose slowly. I stood beside him. My parents didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't even breathe. The empire they thought would be theirs had turned to ash. And for the first time in my life, I walked out ahead of them. The cold outside felt different when I stepped out of Jonathan Hale's office. Sharper. Cleaner. Like the air you breathe after a storm breaks open the sky. Grandpa stood beside me, leaning slightly on his cane. But there was a calmness in his shoulders I hadn't seen all morning, like he had finally put something heavy down. Ready to go home? He asked gently. For the first time in my life, the word home didn't feel like a wound. I nodded. A week later. By day 3, the silence from my parents was deafening. By day 4, Jonathan called. They had signed the transfer documents. By day 7, the Clearwater Bend Lake House, the one my parents had renovated, photographed, bragged about, was legally mine. Jonathan handed me the keys in his office. The gold medal felt warm in my palm, but not as warm as Grandpa's hand when he squeezed mine and whispered, "You earned this not because of what you did, but because of who you are." I cried. He pretended not to notice, but his thumb brushed my cheek when he thought I wasn't looking. Moving day. Walking into the lake house felt like stepping into another universe. Tall windows. White oak floors. A view of the water so still it looked like glass. Sunset spilling across the living room like spilled gold. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I cried again. Not because I was sad, but because I finally understood how much I had survived. The lies. The neglect. The years of working twice as hard just to stay afloat. The belief that I didn't deserve anything more. That belief was gone. Completely. Grandpa's health. 2 months later, Grandpa's health took a dip. He moved into a private care suite in the city, and I visited every day. Sometimes he told stories of his early years, when he drove delivery trucks before building his empire. Sometimes he napped, gripping my hand as if afraid I'd fade away if he let go. "You're my legacy," he told me once, eyes bright with tears. "Not the company, not the money. You." I held his hand tighter. "I'm not going anywhere, Grandpa." And I kept that promise. A new beginning. I turned the lake house into more than a place to live. I converted the guest room into a design studio. I took on clients who needed warm, functional spaces. Single mothers, students, people who felt unseen the way I once had. I offered free consultations. I volunteered at a housing nonprofit. And slowly, I started to believe something I had never believed before. I deserved a good life. A life not built on fear or scarcity. A life where my worth wasn't measured by what I cost my parents, but by what I brought into the world. Grandpa watched every step of it with pride so bright it softened everything about him. Christmas Eve, 1 year later, I decorated the lake house with white lights. Simple, gentle, glowing. I brewed hot cocoa. I set 2 mugs by the fireplace. One for me. One for Grandpa's memory, his favorite ceramic mug with the chipped rim. I stood at the window overlooking the lake, snow falling softly on the dark water, and whispered, "Grandpa, I'm okay. I'm living well, just like you wanted." The lights reflected on the glass, flickering softly, like a smile from somewhere beyond the room. For the first time in my life, Christmas didn't hurt. It felt like hope, like healing, like a future finally mine. And I knew, deep in my chest, that I would spend the rest of my life honoring the man who believed in me, when the people who were supposed to, didn't.